Hello again, YouTube. This is AmKay at Purple Sky 11, and this is part 10 of my series, digging through the documents of the investigation into the death of Owen Hart. This episode will unfortunately need to be split into two parts. I had a sinus infection that put me 3 days behind schedule for this video, which I hoped would be ready to go today, May 23rd, to mark the 24-year anniversary of Owen's death. But I was only able to finish the first half of the video in time, so I decided to just go ahead and publish this part, and the rest will be ready in a few more days. But for now, we're going to look at the in-person interview that Detective Martin had with Tom DeWeer, a stunt expert with the International Stunt Association in Hollywood. During this meeting, DeWeer will be allowed to examine the equipment used for Owen's stunt and give his expert opinion as to what likely went wrong that night at the Over the Edge event in Kansas City, Missouri. And in the follow-up to this video, or part 2, Tom DeWeer will recreate the stunt and test the equipment by doing a few run-throughs of the stunt. So if you enjoy the content, I hope you'll consider subscribing and maybe hit that thumbs up while you're down there. If you'd like to support the channel, you may do so at the Cash App link in the description box, or directly via YouTube with the new Super Thanks option. A super huge shout out to everyone who's been supportive along the way. And with that, let's get to the content. So that's what we're going to start with today, this interview/examination with Tom DeWeer, who is a stuntman with the International Stunt Association in Hollywood, California. This is another report by Detective William Martin with the Homicide Unit, and this is a 3-page report, and the date is now July 7th, 1999. And it was on that day that Detective Martin met with Tom DeWeer of the International Stunt Association in Hollywood, California, to have him review the documents and examine the equipment used regarding this case. DeWeer was briefed on the background of the people involved in this stunt and the facts surrounding how the stunt was intended to be performed. DeWeer examined the photographs of the scene and the equipment, as well as the actual equipment used, which was brought for this meeting. So previously, we saw that some attorneys had met with police to view this rigging, and in those instances, the attorneys were not allowed to touch or move the items. They were only allowed to photograph them. But in this instance, it seems like DeWeer was allowed to hold and examine the actual equipment. This report goes on to say that DeWeer stated the rigging equipment that was secured to the ceiling trusses of the arena appeared to be more than adequate to support this stunt, and that it had a secondary backup cable, which was good, but it appeared the arrangement was sloppy. DeWeer stated that the nylon rope and the rescue rack that were used were standard rappelling equipment and would be adequate for this stunt. He said the AmSpec jerk vest used is primarily designed to be used for diagonal jerks or drag stunts. He stated he has seen this vest used before in falls and lowering stunts. However, he has found that the vest used in this manner puts the main amount of the body weight and force on the torso and chest area of the person wearing the vest, and that it is uncomfortable. He stated this vest could be used for this type of stunt, but it would not be his personal choice. He stated he has seen in the past where this type of harness was used, and when the person was suspended or free hanging for a period of time, the force to the chest area began to affect the person's breathing, to the point of blacking out. He stated that a fall or rappelling harness would have been his choice, which supports a person's weight very well and would allow the person to stay suspended for a longer period of time without any complications, since the weight and force are directed to the seat area of the harness. In part 5, I showed images of stunt rappelling harnesses with the straps around the legs compared to the vest and harness Owen had used. DeWeer stated that in his personal opinion, the use of the jerk vest was a poor choice and that a different harness would have been more suitable for this stunt. So this right here catches my attention. That this type of harness, when it was used, he's noticed that when this person is free hanging for a period of time, that the force to the chest area began to affect the person's breathing. Well, it says for a period of time. How long of a period of time? We already learned from other witness statements that Owen had been free hanging over the edge of the catwalk, waiting for his cue, his entrance cue. So how long had Owen been in this harness waiting for the cue? And is it possible that Owen's breathing was affected as he was free hanging there because of the pressure of the harness on his chest? According to Tom DeWeer, not only is it possible, but he's actually seen it happen before. And if the harness would have had an effect on his ability to breathe, I mean, think about it. If he was already nervous about doing the stunt, his breathing could have already been labored. Could that restrictive feeling have caused Owen to panic and pull the release cord? I don't know. I'm not an expert in any way. I'm just sharing my thoughts as I read through this report. So let's keep reading and see what we have, because that's the end of this page. So now we have to move on to page 2. So kicking off page 2 of this report, DeWeer stated he has seen the snap shackle used in stunts before and referred to the device as a pelican release. So there we have now another name for this snap shackle device. Mark Gibson, a representative from Lumar Marine, the manufacturer of this particular device, referred to it as a trigger latch shackle and noted that snap shackle is a known generic term used for this device in the marine industry. And now in this interview, DeWeer is calling it a pelican release. And DeWeer stated that he was aware of this device being used in the stunt industry and that it was sold by AmKay, which is a supplier of stunt equipment. And police at this point had already spoken to representatives and attorneys for AmKay. All of that can be seen in other videos. But here, DeWeer says that he would not have used this device as the sole means of suspending a person any more than 10 to 12 feet off the ground. Well, Owen was suspended, 80 feet above the arena? But he says he has used it and seen it used for lowering or fall releases at short distances. He stated there is another pelican release that is activated by a squib load, which is a small explosive charge used to activate the release. He stated he has seen that device used in the short falls, and it's controlled and activated generally by the person in charge of the stunt. DeWeer stated the use of the snap shackle device was a poor choice for this specific stunt, due to there being no backup devices and the height involved in this stunt. Yeah, a height of 80 feet, remember? He stated his first choice for this stunt would have been to hardwire the person being lowered to the equipment, with, for instance, a locking carabiner attached to the harness. He stated that the person could be disengaged from the rope just as quick by someone already down on the ground, which he believes would have been the safest way and would have provided the same effect. Well, we already know that one of these stunt riggers was positioned down on the ground at ring level, so they already had somebody down there that could have, as he says, disengaged Owen from the harness just as quickly as with the quick release snap shackle device, and it would have been safer. But taking into consideration some other things covered in this series, it seems like Vince McMahon wasn't satisfied with any other way to do this stunt, that he felt that it looked sloppy, which again, like I said before, I don't get that, because wasn't the Blue Blazer character supposed to be a sort of clumsy, bumbling superhero? So why not just play that up with the disengaging of the harness? I feel like the answers were all right in front of these people the whole time, they just didn't want to see them. Well, anyway, I better not get started on a rant there, but we're right here now in the document if you're following along. It says that Tom DeWeer stated, when dealing with actors involving stunts, he does not allow the actors to do anything or have any control over the stunt because they are not focusing on the stunt and in doing it correctly. They are worrying about their acting. I mean, that's a fair point. DeWeer stated one of the main weak links involving any stunt is the person or actor performing the stunt, if all of the proper equipment is used. So, let me restate that. Tom DeWeer is stating that if all of the proper equipment is used, then one of the main weak links involving any stunt is the person or actor performing the stunt. I want to stress that, if you know that the equipment that you're using is the proper and best equipment to be used, at that point, your biggest weak link is the actor performing the stunt, because they're not focused on safety and on what they need to do the stunt. They're focused on their acting. And because the actor performing the stunt is the main weak link, Tom DeWeer says he tries to not allow them to have any control. he stated there was no backup for the way this stunt was set up, and in his opinion, it could have been designed better with the use of different equipment. So again, he's saying that, you remember he said that if the proper equipment is used, your next weakest link would be the actor performing the stunt. Then he goes on to state that in his opinion, it could have been designed better by using different equipment. DeWeer goes on to state that this does not necessarily mean that the rigger was wrong in the setup, since riggers use the equipment they believe is best for the job. Now this gets me, again, I'm sorry I keep interjecting here, but I feel like it's important to point these things out. These things were covered in previous videos. Remember, this is a series, so each video sort of assumes you're already familiar with information from previous videos. I do my best to briefly explain so viewers who pop in for one particular video can follow what I'm saying. But if you haven't watched all of these up to this point, you wouldn't know this maybe, and even if you have, you might not remember it. But we learned that at this point in 1999, there weren't any rules and regulations for these stunt riggers to follow. That it was basically left up to their preference on what equipment they prefer to use. I mean, that's why he's saying here that just because he feels different equipment could have or should have been used, that doesn't mean that Bobby Talbert was wrong with the way he set this up, because he had the right to use the equipment he believed was best for the job. So I feel like that's necessary to point out. But in Tom DeWeer's opinion, he says right here, he feels that the equipment and the way that this stunt was set up, that it was a poor choice in this instance. But Tom DeWeer goes on to say that not everyone who rigs equipment for stunts will use the exact same equipment or set up items in a similar manner. Again, he points out that it is basically left up to each individual rigger's preference and what that person is accustomed to or familiar with using. So I guess that's fair, that if they are familiar with using certain equipment and for them personally that has worked in the past, then I mean they're the ones we have to trust to have this knowledge and understanding of how this equipment works, right? So I suppose it's fair to say that it's better for them to work with equipment that they're familiar with instead of handing them new equipment that they may have never used before. And yet, that doesn't necessarily mean that the equipment that they're familiar with using would be the preferred equipment, the best and the safest to use for a particular stunt. So in one way, I can see how rules and regulations should be necessary for this industry. In another way, I can say that this would maybe be an instance where you really want to make sure that somebody knows what they're doing, that they have experience using certain equipment. But then again, I guess you could argue, well, how do you get familiar with using specific equipment if you're never in a position where you need to use it? So, I don't know. This is the nightmare that is my thinking pattern. Just kind of goes around and around. So Tom DeWeer stated, and we are here right now. Tom DeWeer stated if he had to allow the actor or person involved in the stunt to activate the release. Because remember, he said up here that he does not allow the actors to do anything or have any control over the stunt because they are worrying about their acting and not focused on doing the stunt correctly. So now here he's saying that if he had to allow the actor involved to activate the release, that he would have used a 3-ring release. He stated this device is similar to the releases used in parachutes, and the cord that must be pulled can be adjusted so it would take an obvious and distinct long movement to activate the device, and it could not be accidentally tripped. The 3-ring release also would have a better shock value for the amount of force and pressure that it can withstand. Well, okay, so using this 3-ring release, it sounds like that would have taken care of 2 main problems that we've already figured out went wrong with this stunt. One problem being that it was just a short pull on the cord to release the snap shackle quickly, meaning that the release cord could have very easily been accidentally pulled and released. And the other problem being the amount of force and pressure, the weight of Owen Hart on the snap shackle release. that as little as, I believe it was 6 to 8 pounds of pressure, or weight in this case, would have allowed that spring release on the snap shackle to drop. And Tom DeWeer is saying that with this 3-ring release, it would have been able to withstand more force and pressure. But good Lord, so much for not interjecting, right? So that's the end of page 2. Let's go on to the third and final page of this interview. Okay, and page 3 begins with Tom DeWeer stating that if he had no other choice and had to use the snap shackle, he would have backed up the device by doubling them up, meaning he would have used 2 different shackles at 2 different pick points or anchor points on the harness, with 1 release line on the left and 1 on the right. He stated that he would have also looped the release cord to ensure there was more than enough slack to try to reduce the event of an accidental trip. So I'm going to interject again, but it was also covered in previous videos about the location of where this release cord was attached to Owen's harness and whether or not it would have been out of the way of him accidentally pulling that cord. And here, DeWeer is saying that if he had needed to use this quick release snap shackle, he would have doubled them up using 2 different ones at 2 different points on the harness. That way, if one of them would have been accidentally pulled, there would have still been another secure shackle attached to the harness to prevent Owen from falling. In other words, had the stunt been carried out in this way, with using these 2 different shackles, Owen would have actually needed to have pulled both of them at the same time, or within very close instances of each other, in order for him to drop to the ring. And I've said that repeatedly throughout my videos, why there was no backup, nothing, in case something went wrong. I can't figure that out. Where were the people yelling in McMahon's ear saying, this is not a good idea? I don't know. So DeWeer came to the conclusion after reviewing the items that safety did appear to be an issue when the rigger was setting up the stunt, shown by the taping of items after they had been checked to ensure they were locked into place. And that's what I was just talking about, that Bobby Talbert had allegedly taped the release cord to the right of Owen's harness. DeWeer says also the use of a plastic tie on the pin that secured the ring on the back side of the jerk vest was another example of safety on the rigging. So wait, it was just secured with a plastic tie? Was this like a zip tie or like a twisty tie? I'm going to be optimistic here and hope that that was like one of those zip ties that police sometimes use for handcuffs. So DeWeer says, in his opinion, the rigger did not focus on the 2 weakest links of the stunt, which was the release and the actor or the wrestler, meaning Owen. And by saying this, I don't think that Tom DeWeer, and I myself certainly am not placing any blame for this on Owen Hart. That's ridiculous. Owen Hart was in a situation that I feel he most likely didn't want to be in. I don't think it's a secret he was not comfortable doing this stunt, but he wanted to please Vince McMahon. But I'm not placing any sort of blame on Owen by agreeing that it makes sense that he could have been one of the weakest links of the stunt. Just because you can't account for something that he would have done in a moment of hesitation or in a moment of confusion. You can't prepare for that. The best you can do as stunt coordinator is by making sure you have the safest, most adequate equipment that you're using and that you have a backup, a safety backup. I'd think that would be a no-brainer, and yet, unfortunately, here we are trying to figure out what went wrong. And the opinion of Tom DeWeer, a stuntman with the International Stunt Association in Hollywood, is that Bobby Talbert did not focus on the 2 weakest links, which were the wrestler Owen Hart and this release, the snap shackle quick release. But Talbert states all of the other equipment used was more than adequate for the use in the described stunt. So to restate, it's this snap shackle device that was one of the biggest problems with the stunt, along with the inexperience with the equipment on the part of Owen Hart. Which again, no blame, no pointing the finger at Owen in this case. Not even a little bit. If I'm pointing any fingers, I'm pointing at Vince McMahon. And that Bobby Talbert, I'm not even gonna. I think I've said plenty about that in previous videos. Moving on. DeWeer did add that many of the items and equipment stuntmen use in stunts may be designed for a completely different application, but if it works and fits their needs, they will use it. Well, again, they didn't have any rules and regulations for these stunt riggers to abide by, and the equipment Bobby Talbert used for Owen's stunt was designed to be used for marine purposes, like boat riggings. And DeWeer stated that it is easy now for someone to say that the snap shackle was a poor choice and should not have been used, knowing what the final outcome of the stunt was. And I have to agree with that as well. If this stunt would have went off without any problems, if it would have worked out perfectly, no one would have ever looked twice at how this stunt was performed. Nobody would have any issue with this snap shackle device. You know, when I think about it that way, okay, my brain just totally flip-flopped. I'm gonna have to take a minute and think about that for a second, because all this time I've been kind of looking down on Talbert, being like, why did you use this stupid device? But looking at it this way, I realize that Tom DeWeer is right. You know, looking back in hindsight, it's easy to say that the snap shackle was a bad choice. See, I feel like I'm looking to blame Bobby Talbert now, and I feel like maybe watching that episode of Dark Side of the Ring is pushing my thinking in that direction. That's why I don't like to watch things like that when I'm doing research, because now I don't know. I don't know for sure. Am I trying to put blame for this on Bobby Talbert because of the emotional pull that that episode had on me? But shit, still, there was no secondary backup for safety purposes, which should have been done, but it wasn't, and that is indefensible. Well, shit, here I am thinking out loud and just recording. I don't know yet if I will edit this out or keep it in. In a way, I'd kind of like to keep it in because I think that it demonstrates that I really do give a lot of thought to what I'm doing here, what I'm saying here. I'm not just reading words on a page. I mean, yeah, I am reading words on a page, but that's not the only thing that I'm doing. I'm trying really hard to give these documents fair consideration without bias, but it's not easy with this case because it all just seems so senseless. It should never have happened. Well, I think that is the end of this report. And so, what's going to happen next on the timeline of the investigation? Remember, this was July 7th, the date of this interview. Now, the next document we're going to look at will be the following day, July 8th, and that report will detail a recreation of how the rigging was set up, and Detective Martin and this Tom DeWeer will test the equipment that was used for Owen's stunt in an attempt to better pinpoint exactly what went wrong. And unfortunately, that's all I have for now. Like I said in the intro, life happened to me and I just wasn't able to get this episode finished, but I still wanted to have something new for you to watch today as a way to celebrate the life of Owen Hart on the 24-year anniversary of his death. The follow-up to this video will be ready in a few days, and that will detail the equipment testing and recreation of the stunt. So if you enjoy the content, please subscribe and hit that little bell so you receive notification when the next video drops. Please feel free to leave any comments or questions, and if you'd be interested in supporting the channel, you may do so directly via YouTube with the Super Thanks feature, and contributions can also be made at the Cash App link that's in the description box. This has been AmKay at Purple Sky 11. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!